Blue
Oh,
taters.
these are your potatoes and carrots. That looks lovely.
Oh,
yes. Is that just out? Is that just out of the pan? That
Pretty
looks
much.
gorgeous. That looks gorgeous. Yeah, really good. Yeah.
Yes, that was my steaming purple carrots and purple potatoes.
Wow!
Wow.
Well done. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Ah.
Brilliant.
So I'd share a picture of my lunch. Right then, hello everybody.
Hello. Hi, Indy.
Can you all hear, if you can all hear me okay, just wave your right hand. And if you can't hear me at all, wave your left hand.
Oh, sorry.
I think I confused a few of you there. Right, welcome everybody. So we're all here today for a Tender Shoots Tuesday Tatty Talk. And I'm really delighted to say we've got Andrew and Amy Skea here from Potato House. And please bear in mind, it's a very busy time for them at the moment because they're shipping out all their seed potatoes to all their customers. So I'm delighted that we've got them to give us a talk today, which is fantastic. They do grow lots of different varieties, so they will be talking about those, but I'm quite keen on the purple and red varieties, so they will be talking about a few of those as well today. I'm sure some of the members have seen my photos before. Now, for those who I've been here regularly will know I like to start every up with a quiz question. So first quiz question, now no shouting out by the way, we'll have the answers at the end. So the first quiz question is, which island has the largest plant diversity in the world?
Oh yes, yeah.
So no shouting out,
I know the answer.
We'll have the answer at the end. So that will get your horticultural juices flowing.
Yeah.
Question 2, now this is just a bit of fun. So you can shout out if you want on this one. What do you call a lazy spud?
No idea. Ouch potato.
Ouch.
Ouch potato.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, it was a bad joke.
We'll let you off.
Moving swiftly on. So just a few bits and bobs then. So for anybody who's here for the first time today, I thought I'd just very briefly explain about Tender Shoots. So Tender Shoots is basically just a group of clubs, affiliated clubs, who got together during COVID to have joint Zoom meetings, because obviously we couldn't have our face-to-face meetings. So a number of clubs got together, created this Tender Shoots Club, and we've been having Zoom meetings ever since. Now, initially it was just a temporary thing, but we've decided to continue on a permanent basis because it's nice to have the flexibility of having the Zoom talks alongside your traditional face-to-face. So if there's anybody here from another club and you'd want to get involved with this and become affiliated, that'd be absolutely fantastic. Please do get in touch with us. We'd love to have you on board. And even if you're not from a club, don't worry, because we do allow individuals to come along like you have done today. Most of our talks are open to anybody, so you're welcome to join us anytime. Some of the talks obviously we have to pay for, in which case we do ask individuals to make donations if they want to, but there's no obligation to do that. For those people who are part of the affiliated clubs who have donated, we have got our Sutton's 50% discount code. So if you haven't got that yet, make sure you ask your committee members or drop us an email and we can send that code out to you. So you'll get 50% off all your seed purchases and 15% then off everything else, all your plants, tools, accessories, everything else. Just a quick reminder that you can have subtitles on the talks. I'm just going to enable that now. So at the bottom of the screen, you should see a little icon that says transcript, and you can click on that and it gives you a live transcript of what's going on today. It's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty good. It does a reasonable job. The only time it has difficulties is when we have people talking about Latin plant names. That's the only time it struggles a little bit, but you can switch that on if you want to now. Our next talk is on the 9th of February, which is a Wednesday. Now, most of our talks are at 7:30 in the evening, but that particular talk is at 3 o'clock. So make sure you make a note of that. And it's from a gentleman called Jeff Bates. The topic is water gardens and water features. Now, some of you may remember Jeff did a talk for us last year on the plant hunters, which people really enjoyed. So we have got the recording of that. If any of our affiliated clubs or donating members want to see that, we have got the recording. Just talking about recordings, make sure you're on our email list to be notified of when recordings are available, but also they do appear on our YouTube page. And you can click the subscribe button on the page. So when you go to YouTube, you'll see that, and you'll see the red button saying subscribe. Now, it's a little bit confusing. It's a bit silly how they've done it, but if you click subscribe, all that does is it just puts it into your favorites. What you also then have to do is click the little bell button to the right of it, and then select all. Then what that means is that you'll always be notified of when there's a new video up on the page. So make sure you do that. Right then, so moving on to Andrew now. The first time I came across Andrew was on the BBC Beechgrove garden programme a few years ago. So there he is with George, one of the presenters, and he was talking about how they develop and create new varieties of potatoes. And they were talking about the purple and red varieties. So I got quite excited because I've been growing them for a number of years. So I actually phoned up Andrew straight after that. We had a really good chat. I had lots of questions, so I was really grateful that Andrew gave me that time, and he gave me lots of helpful advice. And one of the varieties he recommended was Blight Annalise, which I've been growing ever since then, and that has been a fantastic variety. So I'm sure he will be talking about that at some point. But the reason I grow them, I'm sure most of you probably know, is for the health benefits. These are just some pictures of the ones I've grown in the past, the different varieties. And the main reason is because they've got something inside them called, well, antioxidants, anthocyanins, polyphenols, all those kinds of things. Great for blood pressure, heart disease, lots of different things, numerous health benefits. So that's the reason that I grow them. And in our garden club, what we did was when people joined up and paid their membership, we actually gave all of our members some free purple potatoes so they could all grow them together. So we had a bit of a fun competition growing them. And also our local school, we gave them some rainbow potatoes. So we gave them a purple one, a red one, and the pink polka dot one there on the right, which I think is called Mayan Rose. So the kids could have, good fun growing these different varieties and also hopefully get the health benefits from that as well. Now, just talking about the health benefits, I'm sure you've probably all heard blueberries being touted as a superfood, which is a bit of a marketing term. But in my opinion, I think the purple potatoes are significantly better than these blueberries. Apart from the fact that blueberries are quite expensive, the potatoes work out much cheaper and you can eat higher quantities of them as well. So that's the reason I grow them. Also, apparently, if you eat 100 grams of potatoes, it's the equivalent of drinking 3 glasses of red wine. So we all know that red wine is supposed to be very healthy for you, but at least with the potatoes, you don't get the side effects of the alcohol. Now, I'm just going to show you a very brief video. It's about a minute long. So there was a documentary done by the BBC a number of years ago on purple potatoes and about the health benefits. So they looked at this island in Japan called Okinawa, and the people that live there live to a very ripe old age, and they have almost 0 levels of Alzheimer's and dementia. And the scientists were trying to figure out why, and they realized because they realized that their staple carbohydrate was these purple sweet potatoes that they're eating. And it was down to the antioxidants that they were getting from them. Now, obviously, in places like Asia, they eat rice. In Italy, they pasta. Over here we eat wheat and potatoes, but in this particular region they were eating purple sweet potatoes with almost every meal, so they were getting the benefits all the time. So I'm just going to show you a very quick snippet of this video. I will put the link to the full video in the chat box later. Right, so I hope that's given you a bit of a reason to try some purple potatoes next time. And just touching on briefly what Angela was saying there towards the end, that's 100 grams of blueberries on the left hand side. Now, I wouldn't be able to eat that every day, but that's 100 grams of potatoes. Now I can eat probably 2 or 3 times that in every sitting. So that's why the purple potatoes work out better. Right, I'm going to introduce Andrew and Amy now. They are from Potato House. Potato House is a very small family business based up in Dundee. They grow a huge variety of potatoes, organic ones, heritage ones, and speciality types of seed potatoes. Andrew plays an active part in the UK potato industry. He's the past president of the British Potato Trade Association. He's also involved with the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board. He's also keen on curling, and he's the head coach of the local junior curling club. And his favourite potato, incidentally, is Arran Victory, so we'll find out why later. Amy joined the business after the baby potatoes had gone to school. She works mainly looking after the orders and promotion. So if any of you place an order with Potato House later, it's most likely Amy that you'll speak to. She admits to microwaving potatoes before she met Andrew. Amy also enjoys curling, and her favourite potato variety is Highland Burgundy Red. So I'm going to ask you all to unmute yourselves, and can ask you all to give Andrew and Amy a lovely warm welcome and round of applause, please.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for Indy for that lovely introduction. It's really incredible how many people are on this Zoom chat. They've just been flicking through. There's 85 folk, and it's just incredible that you all want to hear about us talking about potatoes. And as Indy mentioned there, before I went out with Andrew, I put a potato in a microwave, or I boiled it, and I had absolutely zero idea of the colours, the varieties. I hardly even knew that you had to put a waxy one for a salad. And then I started going out with Andrew, and 15 years later, I'm still learning. I have all these questions, and pretty much no question is too daft. I think that's what I'm trying to say here, that, you know, from putting it in the microwave to sitting on this backdrop with the 30s or so different potatoes is quite incredible. But it's been Andrew that's been the driving force behind this, and I shall pass you over to him. Now, if you want to write any questions as we go, I can answer most questions quickly, but if they're technical questions, you know, Andrew will answer them in much more detail than I will. And thank you all so much for coming along, and thank you, Indy, for organising this. It's really great. Over to the Tattie man, he's called.
Hello, thank you very much. Right, I don't do very many of these things, so I'm just sort of feeling my way as far as trying to work out what people want to hear about. I'll maybe just spend a while, a short time, just giving a bit of background on what we've done, and try and leave as much time as possible to questions, because obviously, if we're on questions, then I kind of know that that's what you really want to talk about. Indy's given some ideas about what I'm going to talk about. I didn't actually have an awful lot down about the coloured varieties, but he's covered it more than I think I could have ever done. So thank you very much for that. I can answer further questions on that, but yeah, it wasn't one of the big things I had. Right, I've got a presentation here just to sort of guide me through what we're doing. So I will try to share my screen. Is it that one? Does that look like a
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so well, we're now kind of trying to have ourselves known as a potato house. Let's see if, yeah, here we go. Yeah, we're kind of operating under this banner of Potato House now. I actually started the business about 20 years ago. For the most of the first 15 years, actually, we were Skea Organics, and we were mainly doing organic potatoes. And it's only really in the last few years that we've sort of rebranded, mainly because if your business name is Skea Organics, or it's got organics in the title, then you're only really supposed to sell organic produce under that banner. And if you've got anything that's not organic, then you've kind of got to highlight the fact that it's not organic. So there was just too much time spent focusing on what was organic and what wasn't. So doing it under this different brand, we've now got a wider range of heritage and speciality varieties, but we are still the main supplier of organic seed potatoes to the UK market. I better follow what's actually on the slides here that Amy's prepared for me. The family's been involved in seed potatoes for a long time. My grandfather, I think we've got a wee slide of him here. There he is with his old grey Fergie. That's sometime in the 1960s. And that's actually a spinner digger on the back of the tractor. So that's how potatoes would have been harvested back in the 1960s. The farm where he is there, it's just 3 or 4 miles from where we live now. Although we moved to another farm. The family moved to another farm closer to Dundee in the early 1970s. So we've been at growing potatoes for a long time. And I think my grandfather's father probably grew potatoes as well, although I don't actually have anything documented on that. Yeah, we're just north of Dundee on the east coast of Scotland. There's a lot of seed potatoes grown in this part of the country. We've kind of got the right balance of reasonable soils for growing potatoes. You obviously need lots of soil to be able to plough deeply and to cultivate potatoes, but it's also beneficial where we are because it's a bit cooler than where most of you are in the south, and some of the diseases that affect potatoes are easier to control with our slightly cooler climate up here. The aphids don't like it so much, certainly in the winter time, and it's the aphids that spread most of the virus diseases that cause the yields to decline. So yeah, I started the business in about 1999, mainly growing organics, and it was growing quite well for the first from about up till about 2008. And when the financial crisis came, the supermarkets all bailed out of stocking organics, and the demand for seed potatoes dropped quite a bit. So we diversified then into more of these coloured flesh potatoes and heritage varieties like Yukon Gold, Pink for Apple, Belle de Fontenay. We've got a whole range of them. So we started developing that sort of from about 2010 onwards. But this is how we started in the organics. And as I said, organics is still the biggest part of what we do. We would be, if you see organic potatoes in any of the garden catalogues or in any garden centre, then the vast majority of them are coming from us. Myself and Amy run Potato House, and we're marketing these potatoes to companies and to individuals. It's my brother John and my father who run the family farm now, and it's them who grow most of these organic potatoes. Where are we? Yeah, we started Potato House about 4 or 5 years ago, and then it really took off sort of beyond our expectations when the lockdown came and everyone started buying online. And I think that's there'll still always be a market for the garden centres, and we supply a lot of potatoes that go to garden centres. But yeah, that seems to be the way that things are going, is in the direction of the internet. So that's what we're involved in. And for us, the great advantage of the internet is that we can sell such a wide range of varieties. Any garden centre that I sell to generally only want to stock somewhere between, I suppose, 6 or 8 and maybe 20 varieties. There are a few specialist garden centres that want to stock 30 or 40 or 50 varieties, but they're fairly few and far between. So the great thing about the internet is that we've got access to the whole market, and we can sell our wider range. And I think we've got about 60 or 70 varieties on our website this year. So yeah, we started off with these organic varieties. These ones on the screen there, Linda. We've gathered varieties from all over Europe, really, varieties that are most suited for growing organically. So Linda there is a German variety that is particularly popular over there. Mary's Rose is a variety that my father bred himself back in, well, I did it with him. When was that? Back in the 1990s. And Yukon Gold's one that's raved about by chefs. So after the financial crisis and the drop in the organic market, we found, although the organic market kind of collapsed in the UK, the market kept growing quite strongly, particularly in Germany and Sweden, Austria. I think in Austria, something like 10% or getting on for 15% of all food sold now is organic. Whereas in the UK, it's probably still only 2 or 3%. So some countries in Europe have kind of it's just something that seems to have appealed more, and they've moved quite a lot faster than we have. So that's probably why we've found it relatively easy to develop export markets. And our biggest markets were Germany and Sweden and Ireland. Maybe moving about a wee bit here, but yeah, we started the heritage varieties. There's just some examples, but we've got about 20 of them in total, but a couple of my favourites, Catriona and British Queen. They were bred by a breeder up here in Scotland around about the beginning of the 20th century. Lumpers are a variety that I don't know where they were bred, but they were certainly popular in Ireland, possibly as far back as around about the time of the potato famine. And then, as Indy said, we're doing lots of interesting coloured varieties. These pictures don't actually show that they're what the colour of the flesh is, but I think the one on the left is Red Emily, which is a red-fleshed one, and then the one in the middle is I think it's Violetta, which is a blue-fleshed one, and then the one on the left is I'm not sure what you said. It was Pink Gypsy.
Pink Gypsy.
Oh, it is
Yeah.
Pink Gypsy. Okay. I thought it was either Pink Gypsy or Main Rose, but yeah, it does look like Pink Gypsy. It's actually, yeah, it's cut, so it's actually just a white fleshed one. So in total, it says here, and I think we counted them up, there's about 30 organic varieties and about 45 non-organic. The non-organic are mainly speciality and heritage types, so not so much of the sort of mainstream varieties. The big companies do them, and the big companies will sell them in bulk to some of the garden centres, but that's not really the business that we're involved in. So what do you know about what an actual seed potato is compared with maybe the potatoes that you buy in the supermarket? Well, as I've mentioned already, we've kind of got the climate up here to grow potatoes that are fairly free of viral diseases. So that's one of the main differences. They have to be, firstly, the soil has to be tested for various pests and diseases, and if it's free of these diseases, then we're permitted to grow seed potatoes on them. And then we grow the seed potatoes, and through the season they get inspected for various diseases, and at the end of that process we get a certificate, and just to state that they are free, or whatever diseases there are within specified tolerances. Some of the tolerances are 0, some of them are fractions of a percent. And then there's further inspections of seed potatoes during the storage and grading period, just to make sure that they've got less than, again, tolerances for various rots and skin diseases. But organic potatoes have got some, so they've got to meet all of these standard seed potato regulations, but then there are further regulations and inspections in order to meet that criteria. So the land's got to have been free of chemicals or fertilizers for 2 years before it can be used for organic production. And then during the organic production year, we're not permitted to use any artificial chemicals or fertilizers in the production. And again, at the end of that process, we're allowed to sell the produce as organic. One question that you might have is that, why would you want organic potatoes? Maybe a lot of you are growing without any chemicals, and so it maybe doesn't matter greatly if you're using organic seed or non-organic seed. But so the main thing we're trying to promote, well, the farmers who grow organic potatoes, they do need to use organic seed, so that's kind of what got us into it. But the interesting thing for the garden market is that the varieties that we choose to grow organically have all got good resistance to diseases. So in a lot of ways, they're ideal for growing in gardens as well, where you've got no intention of applying any fungicides or herbicides or insecticides. So the varieties, it's more that the varieties that we happen to be growing organically are ideal for the gardener to use. Why should you buy certified seed potatoes? Now, there's no hard and fast rule on this, but there are risks to a certain extent of sourcing your potatoes from anywhere. I've explained what the benefits are of the seed potatoes. They're generally got lower levels of virus. They're certainly been quite heavily tested to look for any quarantine diseases like ring rot or brown rot. If you can probably replant your own seed, and the crop will still grow. In some parts of the country, it might actually be fine. You can maybe use your own seed in some, if people are growing potatoes up here in Scotland in their gardens, then maybe they can grow them for 2 or 3 years, just as we would be growing the seed potatoes in the field for 2 or 3 years. But in other parts of the country where you've got a warmer climate, or where you've maybe got a lot of potatoes in an allotment area or a garden area, there might be quite a lot of aphids and virus disease about. And you might see some of if you replant seed, you might see that some of the plants are just not as vigorous or not as healthy as they would be with certified seed. But then on the other hand, sometimes you might not be able to find the seed of the variety that you really want. Sometimes varieties are not available one year, so you might be happy enough to replant your own seed for 1 year until you can get new seed again. Some people speak about buying potatoes from the supermarket and using them for planting, and again, in a lot of cases they'll grow fine. You maybe don't know where they've come from. They might be UK produced, and they might be from an area that's not got any quarantine diseases, but they could have been through a pack house or a washer where imported seed or imported potatoes have also been washed, and so there is maybe a small risk there. Hopefully, if you get good seed, then you should get a good strong plant and therefore a good crop. Are there any questions already, or are we happy just to go on to the end? I think I'm more than halfway through, so hopefully not too much longer now.
Christina just asked about the difference between a seed potato and the ones that she either digs up or buys at the supermarket, which I think you've just touched on, haven't you, actually?
Yeah, but actually a seed potato is not any different from a normal potato, from what you would, they're all just tubers that have grown. The way we grow seed potatoes here and get them certified, we plant one tuber, the plant grows, and we harvest the progeny. So there's not actually, it's not that they're not different. You could, the ones that you harvest in your garden will grow, but if the plant in your garden has been infected with an aphid and a virus, then probably all the tubers that plant produces will also be affected. But it's I don't really want to overdo it, because a lot of your plants in the garden will be perfectly healthy, and it might be that for example, if you grow a crop early in the garden and harvest a few early tubers, it might be that these are the perfect tubers to give you a nice early crop the next year. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but certainly I would think some people, it's easier if you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know what diseases your crop might have, then you're maybe just as well to buy a new seed. But there can be reasons that you would maybe plant your own as well.
Andrew, just on that one, I think you mentioned something briefly on your previous slide about it as well. I've read in the past that some potatoes are sprayed. There's a weed killer called maleic hydrazide that we use as a weed killer, but I've been told it is also used as a growth retardant to stop potatoes sprouting. Is that what you're referring to on the previous slide?
I wasn't specifically referring to that, but that's right. That's another thing. But yeah, you would probably notice that though when if you try to grow potatoes that have been bought in a supermarket or from somewhere else, that if they've been treated, then the sprouts will maybe be deformed in some way or might not even come at all, or if they take a long time to come, it could well be that they've been treated with some sort of growth retardant to stop them from growing. Generally, the potatoes that are in our supermarkets in the UK, I think that they're certainly mostly not treated. There may be some treatments that can be used, but they're mostly not treated. And mostly the supermarket potatoes, they stop them from growing just by cold storing them. So they're stored at about 2 to 4 degrees. So obviously most of the UK crop is harvested in September, October, but they're then kept in cold store through to the, I mean, they're obviously sold gradually through the year, but they can be stored all the way through to probably the following June, July, August, September. It just depends. If there's been a big crop one year, then sometimes it can take a long time for it to be sold. And yeah, they're just generally sold, generally stored just in a cold store. The sort of exception or a different, it's a different story with the potatoes that are used in the processing industry for making either frozen chips, crisps, or even the chips in your fish and chip shop, because they are all stored at a warmer temperature, maybe 8 or 10 degrees. And if they were just stored at these warmer temperatures without any chemicals, then they would all start to grow quite quickly. So they would maybe all start sprouting by Christmas. So most of the potatoes stored for processing do need some sort of treatment. They were using a gas called CIPC, but it was actually banned just, this is either the first or second season that is not being used. And as you say, they're using MH.
Maleic hydroside.
Maleic hydroside. Obviously, mainly being organics, it's not something that I get involved in, but I do hear the terms. Yeah, so they're still using various things, but they've got other things. Is it orange oil and yeah, sorry, I've forgotten the names right now, but there are other kind of slightly more natural products as well, but there are chemical products that are getting used to store potatoes. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent there. Was there any other questions? If anyone sees, if Amy or Indy sees any questions, then they maybe highlight them to me. What have we got here? Chitting potatoes. Do you all chit your potatoes?
I think so, yes.
There's a couple nodding. Yeah. I'm certainly a fan of it. It's interesting to see. In fact, we're really just in our first or second or third season of selling a lot of potatoes, seed potatoes, direct to the public, and it's interesting to see when people actually buy their seed potatoes and when they want to take delivery of them. It does depend what part of the world you're in, because obviously down in the south, you could probably be, in some parts you can be planting in February or certainly March, whereas in the north of England or certainly in the north and east of Scotland, you know, we're probably not really planting anything until April, and the higher up and further north you go, there are people who will never plant any potatoes before May. So they certainly would, any potato would be happy to be chitted for 2 weeks, but I think you could easily chit most potatoes for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. And the longer you do it, as long as it's not too warm, then they'll just get a nice, thick, strong sprout. So depending on when you want to be planting, so if it's the beginning of March, then you can definitely start chitting them anytime beginning of January or even earlier. you know, as I say, 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks before planting. So the folk that do chitting, then they'll know all the benefits already, but obviously they'll come through the ground. If they've got a good chit on them, they'll come through the ground 2 weeks faster than if they've not got a chit on them. And if they're through the ground 2 weeks faster, then they're going to start growing into a bigger, stronger plant 2 weeks earlier, and you'll hopefully have your crop 2 weeks earlier. And 2 weeks is maybe not a huge difference, but if the blight arrives, again, in different parts of the country, blight will arrive at different times. Up here, we don't tend to see very much blight until probably the first week in August. So it can make a big difference up here whether if you've got, you know, if your crop's just really started to produce small tubers at the start of August and blight arrives, then you've got nothing to harvest. Whereas if you've got your crop 2 weeks further on, and you've got some size coming into the tubers before the blight arrives, then at least you've got a bit of a crop in a worse blight year. So that would be as an organic grower, that would be my main concern. But then obviously the fact you're always looking for an earlier crop as well. The earliest potatoes are always the best tasting ones because you're getting them after many months of eating old crop. So chitting them will help you get these potatoes just a little bit earlier. Where else do we want to go? I'll just go through some of these things quickly, but happy to answer questions at the end. I've mentioned a wee bit about blight. As I said, the varieties that we're selling organically are the ones that have generally got the best blight resistance, because they're the varieties that the organic farmers want to grow on a commercial scale. Blackleg is another problem. Doesn't tend to be a problem in warmer climates. Maybe further south you don't see an awful lot of it. It tends to be brought on by colder, wetter weather, and so it's sometimes a problem for us, and we have to be very careful to look after crops to make sure they don't get blackleg. Sorry, just not planting them too early into cold soils, and looking after the seed, making sure the seed's kept dry through the season. It doesn't like to be sitting in a humid store with where bacteria can sort of spread. Potatoes for, different varieties. I think the best thing is just to try out different varieties. You'll have one or two probably that always do well in your soil, and that, feel free to try a new one every year. And there'll maybe be some that fall by the wayside and some that will maybe catch on and you'll like. But there are varieties that have got good resistance to common scab, so they will do well or maybe do better in dry soils where common scab can be a problem. And you've got other varieties that are better or worse for bacterial diseases. So if you've got a colder, wetter soil, then sometimes varieties that can be prone to blackleg might not do so well. If anybody's got specific questions, then feel free to ask, or we've got information online on these things. Maturities, I do get people saying, "Oh, I don't need an early variety. I'm not in an early area." But I think my main message on that is that it's not really down to first early, second earlies. It's really what we're really saying when we say a variety is a first early is we're saying that it reaches maturity quicker. So it might reach the very fastest ones might reach maturity in as little as 70 or 80 days, but generally first earlies are maybe 80, 90, 100 days to reach maturity. Whereas at the other end of the scale, the main crops and late main crops like Golden Wonder, they can maybe take 130 or 140 days to reach maturity. So no matter what part of the country you're in, if you plant early varieties, you will get an earlier crop than you would do with a late variety. The early varieties will be ready, as I say, in 70, 80, 90 days, whereas the late varieties, 120 days is another whole month of growing. So in some of the late varieties where you, late areas of the country where you can't actually plant until May, you certainly wouldn't want to be growing late varieties because they wouldn't be ready to harvest until end of October or November, and maybe slightly later, and you maybe start getting exposed to frost again. So the earlier varieties, the shorter season varieties, just give you a bit more flexibility. But the later ones would tend to have the bigger yield potential. So that's why, if everything is, it sounds like everything's good about early varieties, but no, the late ones have probably got the bigger yield potential. So so you do have to get a mix. You can go on our website and see all the range of varieties. There's some of my favourites. It's interesting in Scotland and actually quite a bit in Ireland, where they're real connoisseurs of the potatoes. They really, we kind of, up here and in Ireland, they tend to prefer flowerier varieties. So we've got these Arden Victories, Kerse Pinks, Golden Wonders. They're all very dry. Blue Danube, I think that was the last one there on the picture. So these are the type of varieties that maybe you'd be happy to use for baking or roasting, but generally they're not the varieties that you would use for boiling. Whereas in Ireland or the traditional cooks in Scotland here would prefer the flowerier varieties for almost every purpose, including boiling. But salad varieties, the waxier type varieties, would certainly be the ones that would be more suitable for using for salads, for putting into curries or anything that you want the potato to stay as a recognizable solid during the cooking. A salad, a waxier salady variety would be more suitable, whereas a floury variety will generally break down. So if you put a floury variety in the soup, then it'll break down and it'll not be anything. You'll get a nice thicker consistency of your soup, but it'll not really be recognizable after it's cooked. Whereas a waxy variety, if you put cubes into the soup, then there'll still be cubes at the end of the cooking process. I think that's maybe it. So it's maybe a bit of a flying tour, but I've just covered lots of things to kind of give a flavour, and I'm happy to take questions on any subject covered or probably any other subject. I think Amy would vouch for the fact that I can probably talk about any topic as far as potatoes are concerned.
Yeah, I think
if you want a fuller answer, I'm typing furiously away here. If you want a fuller answer or my answer's not clear, let me know. And I'm sorry if I've missed some. It was quite a small chat. I've managed to get it larger. But if you do want a fuller answer, Andrew will also help on that. But I'm happy to keep typing. Excuse any typos and just clicking away here. But yeah, I always love the question, which is your favorite, because it changes. And also we're obviously incredibly lucky. Every couple of weeks Andrew will come home with a new variety of potatoes. But I have to say that out of all our varieties, I've not tried them all yet. So I've got maybe another year or so to go to get through all of them. And yeah, we are incredibly lucky. Andrew just bring potatoes home. So I've tried most of them, and my favorite really is Highland Burgundy Red. I just love it. It's so nice. But yeah, ask any questions.
I didn't say anything about the fact that we're doing breeding as well. We are trying to breed new varieties. The big companies are generally trying to breed fairly mainstream style, I don't know, sometimes I call them bog standard kind of potatoes for the supermarkets. And Yeah, they're generally big and bland and white, and so we've kind of got a breeding program. We've actually got a program to try and breed red and blue fleshed potatoes, mainly actually for making crisps, because most of the red and blue fleshed varieties that are available are fairly waxy. Highland Burgundy Red's quite a flowery red one, but most of the other red and blue varieties are quite salady type.
Yeah, I've noticed that definitely. In terms of the most flowery, it's definitely the Highland Burgundy Red. That just falls apart, doesn't it? But the others all seem to be a bit more waxy and a bit more solid.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, the Highland Burgundy has got a bit of a flaw that some years it can have a brown ring round. It's called the vascular ring. It's about 5 millimeters in from the skin. You can see there's a different color, but just on the inside of that, the white bit, it can sometimes go brown. It's a bit of a flaw in the variety. So again, that was the other reason that we started trying to breed other alternative red and blue fleshed flowerier types for making crisps.
Yeah, I have seen that myself actually on Highland Burgundy Red, that little brown line on the rim. Yeah, and I assumed it was some sort of a defect. There was, I mean, when you started, Andrew, actually, there's a whole flurry of questions. I know Amy has been very busy snapping away on the keyboard trying to answer questions. So I'm sure there's probably a few that she's missed.
I'm sorry if I have. Yeah,
because it was difficult. I've never seen so many questions pop up on the chat box. So Amy will carry on doing that. But if there's any you want to ask Andrew direct, you can do that. I'll try and cover a few as well. If anybody's got any other questions, they can just use the raise your virtual hand function and they can ask them yourself. So Linda's got her hand up now actually, so do you want to unmute yourself, Linda, then you can ask your question.
Yeah, am I done? Yeah. Hi, how big an area do you grow in, and how often do you rotate your potatoes, or do you not need to because of where you are?
No, we definitely do rotate. In fact, the seed potato regulations that we comply with to get our seed certified, we've got to rotate. We've got to leave at least 5 years without potatoes before we go back to potatoes again. However, in practice, the gap would mostly be 6 or 7 or 8. And in fact, some of the fields that are a little bit higher up where we grow our earlier generation stocks, and therefore they're kind of more valuable, we've got to try and make sure to keep them free of disease. We would quite often be growing these on farms where the gap is 10 or 12 years.
Wow.
That's kind of upland land. It's not land that would grow big crops of eating potatoes, and therefore there's generally more of it available.
So how do you decide which ones to grow organically and which ones not? Or are the ones that aren't currently organic, are they because the ground isn't ready to be organic and you've not gone through that process?
No, most of the varieties that we think we want to grow organically, we are growing them organically. So the main organic varieties that we're growing are things like Orla, Ambo, Cara, Charlotte, I think is probably one of the bigger ones. And then we've got some nice red ones, Setanta. And then we've got the Sarpo varieties, Sarpo Mira, Sarpo Axona, and Sarpo Una. So they're all grown organically. No, I think most of the ones that we want to grow organically, they are already grown. Yeah, Vita Bella was one that actually there was a bit of a mix-up, and brother thought that I just wanted it non-organically last year, and so he put it in an organic field. But it's organic now. It's organic this year.
Okay, thank you.
You did ask what area we grow. I think we've got. Let me think now. About think it's about 140 acres, which is probably about 60 hectares or something like that. And they're grown, some of them are on our own land or the family farm, and some of them are on rented farms. So because we've got this big rotation to try and spread the potatoes out, we don't actually have enough land of our own to grow all the potatoes. So we've specialised in potatoes, and we rent land from some of our neighbours to grow potatoes. And the neighbours, well, there's one neighbour, he specialises in chickens, and there's another neighbour that specialises in soft fruit and peas. So different farmers can specialise in different things and kind of swap fields. So we rent land in for growing potatoes, but we rent land out for growing organic peas, carrots. What have I forgotten about? That's maybe it. Yeah, we grow oats ourselves. So we grow organic oats, and we've got our own cattle and sheep. But yeah, rent land out for carrots, peas, and broccoli. That's the other big crop. There's one farmer near us who grows a huge amount of organic broccoli, so he rents a lot of land from us for that.
That's great, thank you.
Andrew, I'm going to try and whiz through some of the questions that have come through. I'm not sure if I've never seen so many questions pop through.
There's one definitely for Andrew. Does pH affect growing?
Yes, well, I know that a high pH tends to cause problems. You tend to get more common scab when you've got a higher pH. Other than that, I'm not sure if the range is particularly critical. We certainly tend to grow potatoes in fields in the last year of the rotation before applying lime. So we kind of like the pH to kind of drop down a bit for growing potatoes. Potatoes are happy with a pH of 6 or 6.5. And then whereas the cereals, so we've maybe put lime onto the field to bring the pH up a bit after we've grown potatoes, because the cereal crops would be happier with a pH of maybe 6.5 to 7.
In the past, when I've grown them, I've always added a bit of ericaceous compost to the pots to try and keep the acidity, increase the acidity, because like you say, they should, in theory, help the scab. Because I've noticed in the ground, I tend to get a lot of scab on my potatoes, but when they're in pots and I've got a bit of ericaceous compost in there, it seems to work a bit better.
Right.
You mentioned about blight earlier. I'm sure someone's mentioned there's something called some sort of is it a Hutton period for blight?
Yes.
And there's a calendar or something, or some sort of a notification that people can get when they need to watch out for it.
Yeah. So I don't know when it was first sort of investigated by scientists, but it was kind of called a Smith period for many years, many decades actually. I'm not sure when. I imagine he was a Dr. Smith, and he was studying when blight tended to develop. And I can't remember the details. I think it's roughly the temperature needs to be above 10 degrees, more or less, for 24 or 48 hours continuously. And the relative humidity needs to be above, I think, 85 or 90% for a similar amount of time. So either if the temperature drops below 10 degrees, or if the humidity drops below 85, say down to 60, then that kind of stops the blight developing completely, and it has to wait. And it might be another week or two before these conditions prevail for the required 24 or 48 hours. So there was this Smith period, and it was the standard for a good many decades. But the scientists at the Hutton Institute, which is fairly close to us here, just outside Dundee, they must have decided to go and do all the research again and just try and fine tune it a bit. So the Hutton period has just got a slightly different definition to a Smith period, but the principles are the same. It's based on temperature and relative humidity. And there are websites where you can get warnings as to when the conditions for blight are kind of present. Hopefully that's going to continue. It was funded by the HDB, but the HDB's kind of been wound up as far as potatoes are concerned.
And there's, in terms of treatments, there's not much out there anymore these days. I know there used to be some copper products, wasn't there?
Well,
there
copper products were a long time ago. Copper was more or less the standard treatment for blight. In fact, copper, it's a bit of a bizarre situation now. Copper is actually still permitted in the organic regulations, but at the same time, the overall chemical regulations that all farmers need to comply with, no company has registered a copper product. So although copper is allowed for organic growers, there is no product registered that they can use. So there's not really any significant product available now, as far as I know. But being involved in this business and speaking to various gardeners from all over, it's amazing how many quirky theories you get, and there are some people will swear by some products. Maybe you guys have got some ideas that I could use.
Well, there is one that the aspirin trick. So in theory, it's the what's it called? What's inside of the aspirin tablets? I've forgotten now. There's a chemical, and you spray that on the foliage. So you get a soluble aspirin tablet, dissolve it in water, and spray that on your potatoes every 2 weeks. And in theory, what it does is it tricks the plant into thinking it's under attack. So it actually makes its leaves thicker and stronger, and hopefully reduce the chance of catching blight. And in theory, what I've read is that it reduces it by 50%. So it doesn't eliminate it, it just reduces the chance. Salicylic acid, that's it. That's the active ingredient.
Acetyl salicylic acid.
Yeah, there we are. Yeah. So I know James Wong talks about that quite often, and he says it works on potatoes and on tomatoes. And if you spray it on your tomatoes, apparently it also increases the vitamin C content by 200%, and it also increases the sweetness of it as well by double. So it's definitely worth trying. And there's no, it doesn't cost much for soluble aspirin tablets, does it?
No.
I think I saw James Wong talk about that on, is it Food Uncovered or what? There's a program.
Yeah, Food Unwrapped.
Unwrapped, that's it, yeah. James Wong was on that talking about how something got sweeter.
There was, I'm not sure if Amy was answering all these questions. I'm sure she was. Somebody popped up with a question about blight on your potatoes. Are you okay to compost the material? Now, it's really interesting because I hear experts disagree on this completely. So some will say that it overwinters on the plant material, and you should get rid of it in the brown bin and remove every trace of it. And others say that in your compost bin, it will just degrade over the winter and it'll be absolutely fine.
Temperature.
I don't know the answer when you're speaking about foliage. I would have thought that the foliage would have mostly kind of rotted, and certainly in a compost bin it might have heated and that might have destroyed it. But I do know that blight can sort of overwinter in the tubers. So if you've got blight in the tubers and you plant blight,
ignore what I put on the chat. Then completely ignore that. I think I actually said, no, put it in the compost. I think we do in the garden.
Yeah.
So ignore me, because we'll do that in the garden, but the professional advice would be.
Yeah. No, I don't have a strong opinion on that as far as the foliage is concerned. But as far as the tubers are concerned, I would say that you definitely have to be careful and not use blighted tubers.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's better to be safe than sorry. I mean, if experts are disagreeing on it, then I'd rather just take the safest option. I mean, it doesn't add much to my compost bin in terms of, overall capacity, so I just stick it in the refuse and it gets taken away. There was a few other questions.
The other problem with putting any type of potato into your, I find there's inevitably there are a few potatoes do make it into the compost bin. And then I grow them in pots the next year, and I think that's not the variety I planted in there. Where did that come from? Yeah, so that's the other problem.
Linda had mentioned that the website that we were thinking of is called blightwatch.co.uk.
Yes.
So I've not I've not used it myself, but apparently you can go on there and you can register, and then it'll send you an email according to what area you live in, as to whether you have a chance of catching blight or when it's due to hit you.
Yeah.
So it monitors the weather in different regions, and then it will let you know once that region has achieved the Hutton period criteria.
Yeah.
It will send you a notification to say, watch out, you've got blight, and then you can start spraying with your aspirin.
Yeah, and I think it's down to individual postcode areas, so
That's right. Yeah.
maybe even more specific than that. I'm just not sure if it's going to be funded next year. That's the only problem. It has been funded by the HDB, which was funded by potato growers, but they've decided to stop funding things like that. So
that's a shame.
it depends if other companies can take that service over and maybe do it by selling sponsorship or advertising or something.
Yeah. Jill asked a question earlier saying that do the purple varieties stay purple when cooked?
Yes. Maybe it sounds like you've got more experience of all the different purple varieties, Indy, but I mean, certainly if you boil them, then the colour does leach. Some of the colour leaches out, but you're still left with a fairly blue variety. Some of them, which were the ones we started with, salad blue. In fact, I'm not an expert in this area, but whereas humans have kind of got 2 copies of every gene, is that the right term? But potatoes have actually got 8 copies of every gene. I don't know how many chromosomes they've got actually, but they've got 8 copies, and so it's actually harder to breed potatoes because you've got 8 copies of everything in there. And it seems to be that sort of the more copies you can stack together of these colour genes, then maybe the more intense the colour is. So the salad blue is maybe only got half as much blue in it as the Violetta.
Yeah.
And,
one thing I've noticed is that you're right. Yeah, I think some of the like the salad blue types have got a lot more white in them. The one that you sell, Blau Annalise, seems to be the best one. It really does hold the colour well, and I think it seems like it's darker than Violetta as well.
it could be, yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
But one thing I've noticed with Blau Annalise, and that's the one, if anybody wants to try it, by the way, that's the one I would recommend, because it does grow really well. It has a slightly different growth habit to other potatoes. So with general potatoes, you grow them and the spuds grow very close to the centre of the plant. Whereas with the Blau Annalise, it's almost like a strawberry runner. It sends these shoots out that grow further away, and then sometimes you might find potatoes about a metre away from where the main plant is.
Right.
Is that something that you've noticed with them, or?
I can't remember on that variety specifically, but yeah, some varieties just produce a certain length of root and then they just produce tubers there and that's it. And other varieties, the root will kind of go on growing and you get more tubers being formed kind of as the season progresses. I think the difference there is the difference between a determinate variety, which just makes tubers at a certain time, and indeterminate, which will maybe go on producing tubers. I hadn't really noticed that about the Blue Annalise, but
yeah,
that sounds like what you're speaking about.
I mean, it seems to have been it's very useful for dry conditions because then it spreads the roots further, so it can get moisture from everywhere else around it. It doesn't have to just rely on the place that you've planted them. So from that regard, it works quite well. And I've noticed the same thing with a red variety, which is Heidi Red. That does the same thing as well.
Well, the Heidi Red and the Blue Annalise are kind of actually bred from the same parents. And it's quite interesting when you cross these red and blue varieties. You'd think if you crossed a blue one with a white one, for example, you just get blue ones. But you don't. You get a mixture of reds and blues and whites, and likewise if you start with a red one, then you can get some reds and some blues. So yeah, they're both from the same parents, and I think likewise, Red Emily and Violetta are from the same parents.
Oh,
so they were bred by a friend of mine in Germany. The first two must be 10 years old, and
Karsten Ellerberg.
Yeah, Carson is an organic farmer in Germany. We've been supplying seed to him for many years, but he had a little breeding program, and it was him that bred these 4, Heidi Red, Blue Annalise, Red Emily, and Violetta. There's one other. Maybe I don't have it.
Okay. Evangeline was asking a question earlier. Now, Evangeline's actually in the States, so it might be slightly different for her, but the question might be useful to other people. What's the best fertilizer to use to fertilize potatoes with? And what schedule would you use? When would you start, and how often?
Well, my area expertise is really varieties and the strengths and weaknesses of different varieties, and I'm not a great expert on fertilizer, I'm afraid. Most of my experiences with growing organic potatoes, where we're actually not really applying any fertilizer, other than possibly farmyard manure, or well, that'd be the main one we would be using. It would just be farmyard manure, and we'd be applying that sort of about ploughing time, so depending on when it's ploughed, early spring. So we wouldn't be applying anything else after planting. Whereas I suppose if you're growing smaller plots, you've maybe got a bit of flexibility to apply foliar feeds or other fertilizers at planting time. But I'm afraid that's not my area of expertise.
Yeah, no worries, no, it's understandable. And Jen was asking, what is, because you mentioned earlies that are great for taste, which variety of those first earlies would you recommend that's the best for taste?
Now, well, Colleen is the first early that I've been selling the most of for the last 20 years. Although possibly because Blight, it's got really good blight resistance. Maris Bard was the big variety in the conventional world, Maris Bard and Premier. And I did grow Premier organically for a first year or two, but I found that the blight resistance of the Colleen was just miles better than the Premier. As far as tasty earlies, I think we have a heritage variety, Catriona or Katrina, that we think is exceptionally tasty. I think Charlotte always gets a good, in most soils, in most conditions, Charlotte's always quite, it's not actually a first early, they're both kind of second earlies. First earlies in Ireland, British Queen, again, it's maybe more of a second early, but British Queen would tend to be the first crop available for harvest in Ireland. It's a nice flowery one. Epicure is actually probably a first early, and it's quite a flowery variety. I think up here we tend to prefer the flowerier ones. We've got International Kidney as well, which is actually the variety that's used to produce Jersey Royals. I think it's not actually a first early. It's just that in Jersey, because they plant them so early, that it tends to be it comes along at the time of the first earlies, but it's certainly got nice taste.
Jacinta was asking a question earlier about storing springboard potatoes. So this is where you buy them in spring and you hold them back to plant in sort of July and August. And she's asking what's the best way to do that, because when she stored them in a cool, dark place, they tend to sprout. Now, in the past, I've told people just keep them in the fridge. Because I mean, I know you can buy them again from garden centres, but they charge a premium, don't they, in sort of July and August time. So it's always better to buy it in the spring and just store them in the bottom of a fridge. Would you recommend that? Or
well, that's essentially what would be happening with them if you were leaving them in the garden centres where you were buying them from a garden centre. So generally the people who are supplying garden centres would keep back a certain number of tons of Maris Peer, Nicola, Charlotte would maybe be the 3 main ones. Certainly Maris Peer is probably by far the most common sort of late planting, whatever, summer planting or Christmas. I mean, they're for harvest at Christmas, but some people call them summer planting, some people call them Christmas potatoes. But yeah, if you're buying them from a garden centre in late June or July, all that has happened to them since March is that they've been kept in a cold store. So you could just as easily buy Maris Peer now, for example, or in March, say, and just keep them in the fridge. Yeah, that's quite possible. In fact, obviously, you'll get the full range of varieties at this time of year, whereas by June, July, August, most people, including ourselves, would tend to just be selling 3 or 4 varieties. But other varieties could be grown at the same time, but there just hasn't really been enough of a market to justify the garden centre stocking a wider range. So you could buy any variety and put it in the fridge now and plant it late.
Yeah,
I think I try to think if there's any pros or cons of that. Generally, you could.
Yeah, presumably it'd have to be sort of an early variety rather than a main crop, because obviously it wouldn't be long enough left in the season for the main crop to establish. It'd have to be an early variety that you would store. Would that be right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Coming back to the fertilizer for potatoes, that used to be the ICI thing, and they what they used to do for the farmers, they recommended ICI number 1, which was a 15-15-14 NPK formulation.
Yeah.
And for that's main crop and second earlies. And for number 9, it was a 5-20-18. In other words, a lot more potash and phosphorus for the first earlies.
Yes. Yeah.
That's 1985.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, just I'm afraid that's not my area of expertise, but
They had a lot of formulations.
yeah, I remember the ICI fertilizers. It's all Chimera and Norsk Hydro now.
That's right. I used to make them.
Yeah.
Andrew, and since Brexit, what's that done to the business for yourselves? I mean, I know when I went to have a look at the varieties that I grow, so Blau Annalise, which I know you supply, is still available. Heidi Red's still available. Red Emily still available. So I was quite pleased they're still available. But so there's others like Violet Queen, which I've been told is no longer available due to Brexit. So what has Brexit done to your business and the varieties that you grow?
Well, the effect of Brexit right now is that, well, firstly, we can't export anything, and we were selling about 40% of our seed potatoes into Europe or Ireland. So we've lost that market completely at the moment. And similarly, it's not really possible to import seed potatoes either. Farmers can actually import full truckloads and plant them on their own land and stuff, but yeah, the rules wouldn't allow a variety to be brought in from anywhere, France, Germany, Sweden, wherever, and remarketed here in the UK. I think the garden market wouldn't tend to use an awful lot of imported seed. Most of the garden market would be a UK supplied or Scottish supplied seed. So it shouldn't greatly affect you folk on your catalogue. You know, whether you buy the seed in catalogues or from garden centres, most of it should be unaffected. From our point of view, yeah, we've lost a big chunk of our market, and unfortunately, some varieties have been quite dependent on the export market. So I grow the Mayan varieties, Mayan Gold, Mayan Rose, Mayan Twilight, and one called Scapa, which hasn't got Mayan in the name, but it's from the same breeding program. So we've got these 4 Mayan varieties, and about 2/3 of all that we were producing was going to Germany and Sweden, and a bit to Ireland as well. So we've lost a big chunk of the market for these varieties, and we might have to reduce the number of varieties from 4 down to 3 or maybe 2. We'll see how it goes. And the same kind of applies to the Sarpo varieties. A lot of them were going to Ireland, so if we've lost the market for a big chunk of them, then it just might make it more difficult to justify growing them. I don't know. It's all up in the air at the moment, really. We tend to grow these speciality and heritage varieties because because we're selling them direct, we've kind of got, that's kind of the model that we're operating on. But the big companies, the big growers and the big potato companies, they really want a variety to be selling 100 tons or 200 tons before it's worth growing. And if it gets down to 50, well, a couple of them, they come to me and say, would you like to take this on? There's a small market for with the garden sector, but other than that, there's not much more demand for it. And so then I sometimes take them on. So varieties like Satanta and Colleen, they were sort of bred and marketed by the big companies, but they got down to a smaller scale and I took them on. But if they get down to being too small, the market's too small, then it makes it difficult even for me to market them unless I've got a great passion for them. I brought Edsel Blue back from the dead, actually. It's maybe a variety that's more well known up here in the north, but it was the one variety I was always getting people saying, where can I get Edsel Blue? Is there anywhere to find it? And so nobody had been growing it for about 5 or 6 years. And I went back to the government laboratory in Edinburgh and got some little plants and then got them multiplied and sort of resurrected the variety. So they can be grown on a small scale, but then the price tends to be, or you need a higher price to justify that. So I don't know. We might end up losing some varieties, is the answer.
Yeah, sure. Amy, I know you're sort of busy typing away. I've had to lose track of the chat box, unfortunately, because there's been so many questions.
No, I'm just trying to, when Andrew was talking about Edsel Blue, I'm just trying to put a picture of the Edsel Blue up there so you can see it, but I don't know if the pictures are uploading. They might be a bit big. If
anybody's got questions, by the way, folks, you can unmute yourselves and ask the question directly. So you're welcome to do that. So you don't have to use the chat box if you don't want to. Andrew, I'm going to ask a quick question actually while I'm here. You mentioned earlier about the sort of organic varieties. So when somebody's looking on your website and they're trying to decide between whether to go for this organic one or just all the traditional types, is there any difference apart from the fact that it's an ethical choice whether to go down the organic route, or is there any actual difference in how it grows and how it develops? I think you touched on it briefly in terms of sort of pests and diseases. Well,
by far the first criteria we look for if we're looking for varieties to grow organically would be blight resistance. So that's the main one. But some varieties are a bit more dependent on fertilizer, and some of them are quite happy to grow without fertilizer. So I suppose the ones that just don't do well unless they get really good fertility might fall by the wayside. But you know, some of our organic land has got as much fertility as land that's got your whatever it is, whatever they use nowadays, 20-10-10 or 13-13-13 or whatever the product was that my father used to use in the old days. Yeah, some of our organic land has got we tend to have cows and sheep on the land for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then that builds up the fertility, and then we might, the man that rents the land to grow broccoli, he would put quite a lot, bring quite a lot of hen manure on to give it nitrogen, and so he brings that all and pays for it, but then there's quite a bit left over when we come to grow a potato crop next.
Amy, and I can see in the chat box somebody's asked about the best antioxidant spuds. Now, the one that I grow for the highest nutrition is basically anything that's a deeper colour. So the one that I've seemed to have found works really well for me and grows really well is Blau Anneliese. Or it might be called Blue Anneliese, I think. It might be. Is it a German variety, I think, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I think it's Blau Anneliese, but we've kind of just changed it to Blue Anneliese. And similarly, Heidi Red, it's actually registered as Heidi Rot, but Heidi Rot being the German word for red. But a potato with rot in the name just doesn't sound that great. So we've just changed it to Heidi Red, which is what it's.
And also the Heidi Rot is actually after the area that it's from. It's the heathland of Germany rather than actually being red. The Heidi Rot is although it is the colour, it's referring to the area as well. So taking the rot out of the Heidi and just saying it's Heidi red makes it a lot more marketable, I would say.
But
and it's a lovely potato.
Do you think has the research been done that says that the ones that have got the deeper blue have got the higher antioxidants? Is that can we kind of go by that? Do you think?
Andrew, now I'm going to get into nerdy mode. So I've tried to look into the research in terms of which has got the highest antioxidants. So I don't know if you remember on that video clip I showed at the beginning where they're talking about how much is in blueberries and how much is in blackcurrants and so forth. And they were showing that the ones in the purple sweet potatoes was actually lower. But the main thing is the fact that they eat a lot more of it, so you get a higher ratio. Now, from the research that I've seen, because I've gone back and looked at that scientist, I've looked at his papers and some other papers as well, and I think the purple potatoes, like Blau and Elise, I think they're the equivalent of the blueberry in terms of its antioxidant, or even higher. So I've looked at the milligrams of antioxidants per 100 grams, and I'm not a scientist, so I struggled with the reports a little bit, but that's what I seem to have found out. And I think ideally it'd be great to have that scientist to do proper tests on those potatoes to work out what the actual antioxidant level is. But I think it is equivalent to a blueberry, and you can eat obviously a lot more potato than you can a blueberry. So yeah, so I'd recommend that. And it's not just purple colours, it's also red colours as well. So the likes of Heidi Red and Red Emily, they've got antioxidants as well, but it's just a different type of antioxidant. It's a bit like, you know how they say you should get your essential fatty acids, like your omegas. Well, there's omega 3, 6 and 9, so you need all different ones. And each omega is broken down further into OLA, CLA and GLA. So it's the same with these antioxidants. So you can't just say, right, I've had one purple potato, I'm okay. You need to have different ranges of colours. So it's always a good idea to mix, you know, black currants, blueberries, raspberries, red berries, different things, so you get in the whole range of them. So I have tried to look into it, but I don't understand it enough. But it would be quite useful to be able to get one of these scientists to do the actual full tests on it. That'd be great. Has anybody got any questions, folks? Again, you can just unmute yourselves and ask it. I was going to ask about wireworm, Andrew. Is there anything you'd recommend for that?
No. It's another area that I've never really, most of my experience of varieties and knowing what varieties have got strengths and weaknesses for different things are just through growing them in our own fields and seeing the produce. You know, I get to know which varieties have always got scab or always got and wireworm is not something that we tend to get very much. It tends to come, I've seen it in coming in land that's maybe been recently ploughed from long-term grass, but it really is longer-term grass. It's, you know, fields that have been grass for maybe 15 or 20 or 30 years, and most of the land we're growing potatoes on has only been grass for 3 or 4 years. So that's where I observe it, but I can't help you with what the solution is.
Yeah, okay.
It must come with where you've got a higher organic matter in the soil.
Okay. Amy, I know I've just seen you've put in the chat box about the discount code. Do you want to mention it briefly here?
Yeah. I'm just finding it, so I'll just type it in, but yeah.
Okay. So Andrew and Amy have very kindly offered a discount code for all our Tender Shoots members. So she'll provide that code to us. If you want to go on their website and order anything, then you'll be able to use that code to give you a discount, which is brilliant. So thank you very much to them for doing that. Jill's just asked a question about if I'm growing in a pot, what compost would you recommend?
I've tried a few composts and generally they've all worked okay. I've actually bought 3 different composts this year to maybe try and my problem is if I buy 2 or 3 different composts, I quite often have 2 or 3 different varieties, so I'm none the wiser at the end of the process which ones have maybe yielded the best. So I'm just going to maybe, and also I see that there are more products coming on the market now. There are these
peat free.
Well, I was going to say the things that the product that's coming out of the biodigesters, and they're quite high in fertility, but I don't know, will they be too powerful for growing a crop? But they're meant to be soil improvers. I think you're maybe meant to mix them through, and it's maybe a bit of a shortcut way of increasing the organic matter in your soil. They're kind of sold in a bag that looks a bit like compost. So, but I don't know whether it would be.
What I've done in the past is I've used, this is obviously going back some time now, before obviously the whole conversation around peat and peat-free has sort of taken hold, is I would normally get a normal sort of multi-purpose bag, and also an ericaceous bag, and probably go for around about 50-50 mix or 60-40, just to try and keep that scab down. And that's always sort of worked quite well for me, just in a pot. But I mean, I have reused the compost for a second year, and that's okay, but then in the third year I've noticed it really struggles, and then all the pests and diseases start to take hold. So I think it's always good to have fresh compost if not every year, then at least every 2 years.
Yeah,
that seems to work.
Could I use, I mean, I've got old compost which was growing bag compost that I grew my tomatoes in. Would I be able to use that if I say mix some slow release fertilizer in with it?
Yeah, I think obviously when you're using the compost, the potatoes are extracting some of the fertility out of it. So after a year or two, it's bound to be left with not an awful lot of fertility left. George is maybe the expert; he can maybe tell us all about that. But so yeah, I would think that adding some fertility back into the compost would maybe solve it. My biggest problem with using compost twice or 3 times is that you end up with varieties that you're thinking, oh, I didn't plant that in there.
Yeah,
somebody's moved my labels.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? You always get volunteers coming up afterwards the following year, and gets mixed up in the variety that you've planted new. So it is quite tricky. I think I guess like previously we'd always have said throw the compost away, or perhaps put it on the garden as a bit of a mulch, and then always start with fresh. But I think obviously we're all trying to be a bit more conscious now these days, aren't we? Not have to buy new bags all the time, so we can try and reuse where possible. But I think probably what you're suggesting there is using tomato compost is probably useful, and although it's the same family, tomatoes and potatoes, the actual pests like the blight are actually a different type of blight, aren't they? So you're not going to have any issues with that, really, are you?
Yeah, I don't know about I mean, we're doing quite a lot of genotyping on different blight strains. There's different blights even within potato blights. And I've got a wee bit of an insight into that. We were testing every time a blight came into a variety in the last season. We were taking samples and sending it off and trying to find out which blight strain it was. There was so the Heidi Red and Blue Annalise, we had them down as being pretty blight resistant, but one of the fields that they were in last season, they actually got blight earlier than a lot earlier than we were anticipating it, and we got it tested, and it was a different strain of blight that was causing the problem. It was in an area closer to Dundee, possibly closer to gardens and allotments and things, and maybe there was more of a mix of blight strains in that area, whereas some of the more rural areas, you tend to either have no blight at all, or you maybe just get one blight strain coming in. The more built up areas, you tend to get a bigger mix quicker.
Okay. And have you come across that other variety I mentioned, Violet Queen? Because that seems to be quite blight resistant for me.
No, I haven't actually. I've maybe, I can't say that I've seen it. We've got Purple Majesty is the other purple one that I know people who do grow it, but I don't grow it. But I don't know what did you say it was? Something Queen?
Yeah, so I've done Purple Majesty in the past for quite a few years, but that suffers with blight very, very quickly, and the crops on it aren't massive. You do get some big individual potatoes, but the overall crop is not great. So the Blau Annalise, that's always quite consistent. I mean, they're smaller potatoes, but I do get quite a large crop from it. And the other one I mentioned was Violet Queen. That seems to be very good, very sort of uniform potatoes. And that's, again, a very deep purple one. And I don't seem to struggle with blight on that one. So that's quite a good one.
I have one question for everyone here. It's a question I always really like the answer to. Is it tatties or is it spuds? Because is it geographical? Is it a geographical split, or is it an age thing? We're very, very definitely team tatties here. So who's tatties and who's spuds? Who say spuds?
It's all sorts of names all over the country, actually.
And taters, taters is quite a kind of common one as well, but tatties and spuds.
I'm trying to see where that Violet Queen comes from. Is it an HZPC variety? So it's maybe produced in Holland.
The last place that I bought it from was Dundree's. So I know they've got it on theirs.
Right.
Cherry, have you got a question there? You got your hand up. Oh.
Yeah, it's an HZPC variety, so it's probably coming. It's probably been Dutch seed in the past. Do you know if they've maybe not got it this year?
Right. Luckily I've still got some left over from last year, so I'm just going to replant those ones instead.
Yeah. Okay.
But, is that as a result of Brexit, do you think, or?
Yes. If there's not a grower in the UK that's got it, then they wouldn't be able to bring it in this year.
Okay, no problem. Cherry, did you have a question? You had your hand up earlier.
No, I didn't have a question, but I was putting my hand up because I call them tatties.
Oh.
No, spuds in Herefordshire.
Spuds, right.
Thank you.
It's always a great question, because people just can't imagine calling them something else.
I always think spuds being very Irish. They all call them spuds in Ireland. Mm-hmm.
I've always thought tatties was a Scottish name.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in Lincolnshire, tates is quite a common name, isn't it?
But there's sort of further kind of northeast. It reverts back. I mean, talking northeast Scotland, it reverts back to spuds, and there's a real mixture of what people call them, and so it's always interesting to see if it's geographical, or do people just say potatoes, or
Evangeline saying over in the USA they call them spuds. So that's interesting. And Jill's saying in Wales they call them tatwas. I don't know if that's a typo. Tatwas.
It'd be tates, is it?
Tates.
No, it's tattoos.
And you actually, in your initial presentation on coloured potatoes, you mentioned was it the video clip that you gave us actually was about sweet potatoes, which are actually a completely different species altogether. Yeah. They're not related in any way to potatoes. We're kind of constantly plagued by people saying, "Have you got any sweet potato seed?" Of course, I think they need a different day length. I've tried to grow them up here in Scotland, and I just didn't have any luck. But maybe didn't persist long enough. But you would normally buy them by buying slips. Is that right? They're kind of what's a slip? It's a kind of growing stem.
So they what they do is they send you something that comes through the post, and you look like you've been cheated, really, because you end up with these little shoots of what they call slips with dried, shriveled up leaves. Oh my God, what have I been sent? But you put them in water and they soon perk up, and eventually they will grow roots, and then you plant them out, and that's where you get your sweet potatoes from. So yeah, it's a completely different plant to the regular spuds, but again they come in various colors, so you get them in whites, orange, purples. So I've bought purple sweet potatoes. The only two places that I've been able to get purple sweet potatoes from is from a Chinese supermarket. So they tend to sell them quite often, but it's usually about £4 a kilo, so quite expensive. And the other place that does them is Waitrose. So if you want to try purple sweet potatoes, that's where you get them from.
And on the topic of what they get called, we're exporting. We have exported small quantities for trials or in the hope of maybe developing markets to West Africa, Ghana, and Ivory Coast, and also to the Caribbean, Grenada. Certainly, there was some went there, and they always refer to potatoes in these countries as Irish potatoes. And if you just refer to potatoes in these countries, then they're quite often just referring to sweet potatoes. So they kind of just call sweet potatoes potatoes, and if you want a proper tatty, then you've got to refer to Irish potatoes.
Norma, you've got your hand up there. Have you got a question?
Yes, as regards in a garden, what sort of rotation time would you have? I've not got that much land, and I usually grow 5 rows of different ones. So I must admit, I do it alternate years. Is that bad?
Well, I've been to visit potato production all over the world, and there are lots of places. In Holland, for example, they're growing potatoes on a commercial scale, certainly every 3rd year. And there would be places that are growing potatoes every 2nd year. So it is possible. The biggest issue is probably PCN, potato cyst nematode, which sort of attacks the roots. But if you're harvesting, if you're growing earlies and you harvest them early and take them out, then I think that's too short a time for the life cycle of the nematodes. There's lots of different factors, and there's some varieties that are completely resistant to potato cyst nematode as well. So if you had a problem, then you could maybe solve it by choosing the right varieties. But I don't know where I would start in trying to work out whether you've got PCN in your soil or not. You know, if you don't have it, then you probably just continue.
Don't think I've had a problem. This year I bought Charlotte, Nadine, Kestrel, Cara and Desiree, 10 of each.
Right. Well, the Cara is certainly resistant to the PCN. I don't think any of the other 3 are, but it might be that that you don't have a problem. Cara is obviously a late variety, so it would certainly it would have a long enough season that if you had varieties that were as long as Cara, then it would, the PCN would have time to hatch out, because the little there's these little eggs that are in the soil, and they seem to be able to sense when there's potatoes growing in that soil, and that causes them to hatch out, and then the little eelworms there must be some sort of tiny worms that make their way to the roots and feed on the roots, and then they form the little eggs that are visible. They would get formed later in the season. So it's a whole cycle. Yeah. No,
normally I dig just a hole to put a potato in, about a spit deep, and I put manure in the bottom, a little bit of soil to cover it, then the potato, then I shake some grass clippings over, because I heard that was supposed to stop scab, and then I cover them up. But last year, because I'd seen a Zoom meeting about no dig, I thought, well, I'd do that and cover them with grass clippings, and a neighbour actually gave me a whole trailer load, but it wasn't a success because the blackbirds come along and are scattering the grass clippings. And I ended up with a rather lot of green potatoes, so I'm not going to do that this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good experiment. We know quite little about no dig, and you know, quite often we get asked, and so you know, we've never experienced it, and so it's quite interesting to have a first-hand you know, experience to hear from you.
Yeah, I can't really imagine how growing potatoes is going to be compatible with no dig. I know what you're saying. If you're leaving the majority of your ground not dug and just dig a hole for the potato, but then to harvest them, you're going to have to dig the whole area.
I do know, Dig, and I the first year I wasn't very successful. The blackbirds unrooted them all the time, and I did have a lot of green. You just need more mulch. I don't use grass clippings because Charles Dowding recommends that you use a composted mulch because of with our wet climate that you get slugs, etc., which would then burrow into your slugs, which is, you know, I assume would happen. So it's composted. So I just found I needed a lot more compost on top, or mulch or whatever it was, farmyard manure, well rotted, garden compost, which I've got plenty of. So I did that, and you don't need to dig them out. You just grab hold of the stems and pull, and they just come. Or you can just look down.
They're mostly fairly above the surface. So the potatoes are kind of above the soil, but under the mulch. Is that where they are, or are they in the soil as well?
No, they're not in the soil at all. The roots go into the soil. The feeding roots go into the soil, but the roots with the tubers on are above the soil. I mean, I just make a tiny, you know, I just put the mulch on, then just make a little hollow down to the soil, and just cover them over with the mulch, and then earth up with more mulch, and you plant them so much easier.
Yes.
You know, they're in next to no time.
I mean, it's a topic that we're going to have to learn an awful lot more about, because farmers are going to be getting more and more pressure to do things that increase the carbon in the soil and don't deplete the carbon in the soil.
Which digging does.
Yeah, and I know that there's one organic farm very close to us he's decided that he's going to stop renting land out for potatoes. So he kind of feels that potatoes is not compatible with trying to increase the carbon in soil long term. But I think there's quite a lot of work to be done on that yet. And
I'm sure commercially, obviously it's a different ball game, isn't it? Commercially to being, but the chap, you know, would be Charles Dowding to discuss with. You know, I mean, I know he doesn't he does veg boxes, I believe, or something like that. And he is a market gardener, but mainly dealing in leaves, salad leaves and salad bags and things like that. But he does grow potatoes, and he does grow it like that. So I found that you know, it's just so much easier than all that back-breaking work, digging it. You know, works for me. It worked last year for me, particularly well. Yeah.
Yeah, Sue and Bob were saying it works for them as well. Their father and uncle always covered potatoes with grass clippings to protect the chits and prevent scab. So it seems to work. And the other thing you were mentioning earlier, Andrew, about the PCN, a little trick which I'm sure would probably apply to that as well, is that with a lot of these pests, they will overwinter and then they'll wait for you to plant the crop in the ground, and then they'll hatch, and then they've got the potato there to feed on, because obviously they can sense the plant or smell the roots or whatever. So what you can do is you can actually mush up the plant, so the potato, pulverize it into a liquid, and spray it on the surface, and then the insects or the pests will notice that the potato is there, so then they'll hatch and they'll try and feed, but there's nothing there for them to feed on, and then they just die out. So if you do that over a period, hopefully that should bring the ground back into cultivation, because you've eliminated most of the pests. The same thing applies to what's that one you get on onions? White rot, yeah, white rot, I think it is, isn't it? So again, if you crush up onions, because they say you can't plant there for again another 7 years, I think, is that right, if I remember correctly? So if you crush up the onions and just spray it on the ground, and do that every sort of month or so, all the spores will hatch, and they'll think, oh, right, it's ready to attack the plant, but there's no plant there for them to attack, and then eventually it dies out.
I know that principle's been used in commercial potatoes. They're mostly using cover crops that have got certain characteristics similar to potatoes. They kind of trick the PCN into hatching, and then but they can't complete their life cycle. So there's maybe some, well, potatoes is the species Solanum tuberosum. There's some other Solanum type species that seem to be close enough to potato that they maybe trick the nematode. And the chemicals that have been getting used in agriculture, the ones that have been getting used to kill nematodes have been probably amongst the most hazardous to the environment of anything. I mean, some of the herbicides, they're fairly fast acting, and they kind of disappear. And the same with some of the insecticides. I mean, okay, you might not want insecticides at all, but if you use insecticides, they're pretty fast acting, and then they disappear. But the nematicides that were getting used to control PCN and other nematodes in the soil are pretty nasty chemicals, and they were putting them into the soil in such high volume that they were killing off all sorts of soil life. So this, yeah, so this business of trying, and some of them have been banned. So many of the chemicals they have been using are no longer available. So they're starting to use more of these cover crops but then, you know, if you get a cover crop that you can just put in the winter and then plant your crop in the spring, that's okay. Some of them need the whole season, so your land's kind of out of use for a cash crop for a whole year, while you're, you know, it's a fairly drastic action to be taking to get your nematode levels down. But some people are doing it; they have to do it.
Yeah, sure. James, have you got a question? You've got your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could give us some sort of advice on watering potatoes to get a good crop. I mean, is it best to water well in the early part and then try, if possible, to keep them dry coming up to harvest? Or
well, potatoes don't like it being too wet, but they don't like to be short of water either. So it's just a matter of trying to get the balance right and not having the ground sodding wet all, you know, at all. They don't really like to be sitting in water. But in particular, if you've got problems with common scab, then that can happen. That seems to only happen if you've got a dry period around about the time of tuber initiation. Tuber initiation is generally about 4 weeks after they come through the ground. So you might think, well, you know, they're not really growing at that stage, and so you maybe don't bother watering them. They can be a bit dry, and that's when common scab comes in. So certainly try to keep them a little bit watered at that time. For us, planting at the beginning of May, they're maybe coming through the ground about the beginning of June, and it's really somewhere around about the end of June that they need a bit of water just to keep the common scab at bay. Obviously, if you're planting at the start of April, then it's all happening a month earlier than that.
yeah, I mean, I do get a few tubers that are splitting when I lift them. And is that excess water later on?
Yes. Well, splitting would be caused by the plant probably being too dry for a while and then suddenly getting a big amount of rain, and then it grows in a kind of spurt, and the tubers will kind of not grow evenly and they'll split. So yeah, it would be better to have a kind of water or rain little and often, and not have a long dry spell followed by a deluge of rain.
Yeah, it's just a bit tricky because I live in the Lake District and it gets about 80 inches of rain a year, so we don't always get it when we need it, and sometimes we get it when we don't.
What you could try, James, is those varieties we talked about earlier that Andrew and myself mentioned, Blau, Annalise and Heidi Red. They've got a slightly different growth structure. So the potatoes don't all grow in one clump in the centre. They seem to sort of spread their roots out much further. So it works really well in sort of dry conditions. So what you could do is actually mount your potatoes up higher when you plant your seed potato, so they've got good drainage, but the roots will then go further afield to get the moisture whenever they need it. So because you've planted it in a mound, it's not going to get soggy, and because it's got the roots to go further, it will never dry out. So you could try those 2 varieties this year and give that a shot.
Yeah, I could do. I've actually bought my potatoes already, so.
What varieties have you got?
Well, I'm growing Casablanca for my early crop, and
Right.
then I'm going on to a mower, and then we've got Sarpo and Miro, which we can leave in a long time because they're blight resistant. And I harvest them. Well, I harvest the earlies as I want them, and I try and get them off early so as I can put down a cover crop, some Italian ryegrass or something like that, and then I can, or sometimes I sneak in another crop and then put Italian ryegrass in about September, October time. But that's just me.
Sounds great.
Casablanca's a nice, tasty first early variety. I do like that one.
Yeah.
I don't know Amour at all. It's I think that's a JBA variety.
Yeah. Well, you can get it through other sources, but
maybe so. But yeah, I think that's one of the ones that he has. And then the Sarpo Mira will have come from us, but we've probably sold it wholesale to whoever you've bought them from.
Yeah, you must sell it in ready packaged bags, do you?
No. Generally, no. We would sell them in bulk. So if they were going to JBA, for example, they would be in 1 1/4 bags, and he would pack them. Likes of who else has them? Taylor's Bulbs have got them, and WCF take them.
We're all actually pretty friendly. The potato industry, they all know each other, or they've gone to school with each other, or they're related to each other, and it's a friendly rivalry. And it's always nice. Like there's no, real.
It's a little bit of a trick. It's a bit of a trick question. If I ask you which varieties you've chosen, then I can quite often tell who you've bought them from by whatever the mix of varieties is that you're growing.
Well, I just got them from the local garden centre.
Right.
But the only thing with Sarpo and Miro is, I only want about a dozen of each, which might not sound a lot, but it's me, and there's only 2 of us. But to get Sarpo and Miro, you've got to buy a 2 kilo bag. You can't just go in and pick the others. You can pick out loose and just take the exact number you want.
Yeah, it's interesting how the garden market for seed potatoes has developed over certainly 30 or 40 years. It used to be that everything came in 3 kilo bags, or I don't know, whatever the number of equivalent pounds was to that, maybe
7.
7 pounds was it? Was that the standard garden centre pack?
No,
but yes, okay, it's half a stone, yeah. That quantity of seed potatoes would plant a whole allotment. And nowadays we kind of feel that people want to be growing 2 or 3 or 4 varieties and probably don't want to be planting a big area. So we've only been packing and retailing ourselves for we've been doing it on a small scale for maybe 10 years, but really it's kind of taken off in the last 5 years. And we don't do anything but bigger than 1 kilo. In fact, 50, I don't know what the figures are, Amy, but more than half the packs that we sell are just 6 tuber packs nowadays.
We do have some 10 kilo packs, but most people who buy them will say, "Oh, I'm splitting that with 3 or 4 neighbours or whatever." And so we started to sell the 6 tuber packs just 2 or 3 years ago, and instantly everyone just went, "That is so good," and went boom, because you can try 3 or 4 different varieties, whereas you maybe would have had just 1 or 2 varieties before. And because we pack up in our farm, we can do that. We can do that cost effectively, to have them packed up in packs of 6 tubers, and it's quite interesting, because as soon as we introduced it, outsold. It pretty much outsold the 1 kilo packs instantly. So it was. It was
And the other thing is, we're doing a lot of specialty things. These coloured varieties and the Belle de Fontenay's and Pink for Apples and the like. People tend to want smaller packs of these as well. So most of the varieties we do, they're kind of more popular in small packs.
Brilliant. I think we
Thank you for that.
About it for the questions then now, I think, folks.
There's a lady with her hand up. I can't see the name. Griffiths.
Norma, I think she asked a question, didn't you, Norma?
Yes, the trouble is I froze, so I didn't hear what you actually said at the beginning. As regards how far apart they should be, but as I said, I tend to do an alternate years because of the space. No, I hadn't put the hand down, sorry.
It's okay, no problem. Right then, folks, I think that's about it in terms of questions.
Very good.
So if anybody has got any other burning questions, ask them now, or you'll have to wait till next year.
You know,
oh no, you can just send an email to Amy if you've got any questions.
We're always available, and you know, if you buy your potatoes and then you have questions after you've bought them and how to do this and what to do and when you should be doing things, we're always happy to, you know, to help you and to advise you. And we've got quite a good active social media Facebook page that people put questions on. You know, is this blight, for example, was a very common question, but it's really good to see the photos and to help people. So we're always available for any potato questions, and then you'll just get Andrew chatting for an hour. So you're but if anyone's got any other questions now, like for, you know, how to grow, or, you know, if you're mounding up, or we're happy.
Brilliant, fantastic, thank you.
Okay.
And Amy, did you manage to put the I don't know if I've not seen in the chat box, but did you manage to put the code in? Did you find it?
Yes, I did. Yes, and then
fantastic.
Andrew, the last slide should have it as well. But I'll put it. What did I do? I had it. There, it's about halfway up. I'll just put it. It's not quite live yet, guys. Sorry, it will be live about 10 minutes after the end of this. It was a last minute decision. I'll put it at the end again.
Oh, there it is. There. Tender shoot 10, I think it is.
And so that'll be live, as I say, in about 10 minutes after the end of this. And if you need help on varieties or quantities, you know, always at the end of an email for you.
That's brilliant. Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I think we've all, I mean, what time is it now? 9:30. So really appreciated you giving us this time.
Is that a record?
I think it could well be, actually.
And there's still 42 people that like to talk tatties.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I mean, I lost track of the chat box right at the beginning because there were so many questions coming through. So so thank you very much.
Very
I think
good.
We've all thoroughly enjoyed your talk to us today, and for spending that time to answer questions, particularly during a part of the season which is very busy for you. So I think we'd all like to say thank you. So can I ask everybody to unmute yourselves, please? And can you all give Andrew and Amy a lovely round of applause?
Thank you. Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Thank you very much for your time as well.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. The questions are always interesting of what people like to know about and what to hear about. So yeah, thank you all for coming.
That's
and
fantastic.
go and enjoy some haggis, meats and tatties now for Robbie Byrne tonight.
First night, yeah.
Yes,
Very
yes.
nice, isn't it?
Yes.
I was asking Andrew and Amy earlier before everybody arrived whether if this went well, whether they'd want to do it again at the same time next year. So, but I think because a few people have already bought their potatoes, we might have to do it a week or two earlier. I think next year.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
So fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you, folks.
We'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. That's brilliant. Right then, folks, I'll give you the quiz answers. Has anybody got any answer for me?
Prince Edward Island.
Oh, what? Sorry.
Prince Edward Island in
No.
Canada.
Madagascar.
Madagascar.
New Guinea. Is that where that corner's from?
Is Australia allowed to be called an island?
New Guinea.
Did I hear somebody say the Isle of Wight? No.
New Guinea.
New Guinea must have a lot of
Yeah.
Largest plant diversity in the
Oh,
world.
I thought you meant Cuba.
Oh
Yeah.
New Guinea. Oh, blimey.
New Guinea. I thought you meant potatoes. That's why.
Oh, that's a tricky one, that.
Yeah, New Guinea. Yeah, apparently.
Right.
That's a very rare rhododendrons there.
Right then, folks, just a quick reminder, don't forget our next talk is February the 9th. It's Wednesday, and it's at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's from Jeff Bates. Topic is water gardens and water features. So make sure you put that in your diaries. I will open up the breakout rooms again in a moment, but for those who want to leave now, I'll say goodbye and hopefully see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you. Really interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.